any of the previous lectures. You will find it on YouTube. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask. Use the queue function of the Zoom in order to maintain the queue. Also, raise hand function of the Zoom in order to maintain the queue. Also, if you are not speaking, please mute yourselves in order to minimize the disturbances. Thank you.
Thank you, Prajwal.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyagena yopakurotam pravaram muninam padanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuve padanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartrusutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. We discussed the 29, 20, 30th sutras last time. Some of these sutras are very elaborately discussed by Vyasa in his commentary, and the commentary throws new flashlights to the sutras and their implications. So I shall begin by dealing with the sutra number 30th, Tataha Klesha Karma Nivrittihi. We already discussed this in general without going through the commentaries. Now we will go through the commentaries. The commentaries you can see, of course, the description, the explanation that I gave earlier in the last session on the sutras are based on the commentary. But when you read the commentary proper, you can see the deeper insights that you find in Vyasa's words. So tataha klesha karma nivrittihi. So the meaning is, from this experience. So it is a reference to the previous sutra, that is dharma megha samadhi. So we already discussed this earlier. When a yoga practitioner reaches or attains this higher level of discerning wisdom, in the translations you find discrimination, that's a word used, but what it implies is this higher discerning wisdom, which in reality means when we get rid of all internal conflicts. Our mind begins to flow naturally, effortlessly. So what is the difference between a normal human being and a yoga practitioner who has attained this higher wisdom, this viveka khyadi or dharma megha samadhi, this higher level of concentration, where it is actually described as raining dharma, means is pouring dharma. Dharma here means internal bliss, an internal sense or experience of total freedom from all conflicts. When you feel that you are actually floating in the air without any weight, any burden, that's what actually happens to a yogi. When this happens, one very simple experience will be a total absence of any kind of internal strain. That's what it means. It means you don't waste your time and energy. You don't drain your time and energy through conflicts, anxieties, and worries. And it helps you to save your energy, internal energy, means intellectual energy, emotional energy, nervous energy, mental energy. Actually, we lose a lot of our energy resources by unnecessary thoughts when we indulge in unnecessary anxieties and worries. We can just imagine, to give an example, we spend a lot of time on what might happen in future. We had to plan, we had to anticipate, we had to do some planning beforehand before you undertake any any duty, work, or whatever it is, any endeavor. But frequently you find a lot of mental energy, emotional energy, or time could be spent or wasted in unnecessary worries and anxieties. It actually makes our mind nervous, exhausted. This is very common. In its most pathological, higher level, we call it depression or melancholia. That's all. But this happens to normal human beings also. If we can actually watch how much time and energy we waste, or we are forced to it, we don't do it deliberately, our mind ponders over many things. There are, of course, occasions when mind has to worry about certain things. Mind has to get anxious about certain things, no doubt about it. But very frequently, on many occasions, our mind indulges in unnecessary thoughts and anxieties and worries. When you attain this yoga concentration, when you completely transcend vrittis, karmic blocks, internal blocks, mental blocks, what happens is there's a total freedom from anxieties and worries, and you stop draining your energy resources through worries and thoughts and ideas. I mean, the energy resources do not flow through unnecessary channels. All mental blocks are gone. I mentioned this earlier. Yoga Abhyasa leads to Viveka Jnanam. It leads to total cessation of Vyuthana Samskaras. Some samskaras emerging, another good samskaras suppressing it, again a negative samskaras emerging, another positive samskaras suppressing it. This is what really happens before we reach this higher state of Vivekhyadi or Dharmamekha Samadhi. When we attain the Dharmamekha Samadhi, what happens? All vrittis are completely transcended. It's Nirodha Samskara. We get established in the positive mental framework. And that helps us to prevent waste of energy. This is the most important thing. You can easily imagine the amount of work that the great spiritual teachers, great mystics have done. I have given a number of times the example of Shankaracharya, because I don't think there is any other historical figure who more deeply exemplifies, demonstrates total freedom from waste of energy. Shankaracharya's life, you can read it. This is documented life. This man lived for 32 years. If he had not lived in 8th century, we won't be reading Bhagavad Gita today. We won't be discussing Vedanta today. Practically anything that is of any significant, substantial value in Indian philosophy is his creation. And he lived for 32 years, became a monk when he was less than 7 years, had finished writing all the books before he was 16th, traveled all over Indian subcontinent, including today's Afghanistan, today's Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, Sri Lanka, entire Indian subcontinent. He traveled right up to Tibet, huge subcontinent, almost double the size of today's Indian Republic. 4 times. He established 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of India, established 10 monastic orders, wrote the most profound philosophical books in Sanskrit language, in Vedanta Hindu tradition, in Indian tradition, and wrote the most profound devotional poetry in Sanskrit language, held thousands of debates, walking all over the country, all over the subcontinent. And then whatever you find today in India, even if you go to Shiva Vishnu temple in Bay Area, the puja they perform, he was the one who actually formulated these rules and regulations in mantra structure. If you go to any Hindu temple, you may find a number of deities. Shankaracharya spoke about a level when you go beyond all deities, all gods and goddesses. He was talking about one supreme divine principle that is omnipresent, omniscient, immanent. That was the theme of his philosophy. One supreme, impersonal, transcendental, supreme reality, not a anthropomorphic God with 4 hands or 2 hands and 1 leg or anything of the kind. He was talking about supreme divine principle, Atman and Brahman. But the same Shankaracharya wrote all the rituals for doing puja and worships to all these deities that you find in Indian temples, including the temples in the Bay Area. Even the mantras that we use for the most concrete, gross kinds of rituals, it is his creation. And he passed away in 32 years. And look at Christ. This is another example. A Buddha, he of course lived a little longer, 80 years, almost 3 times, less than 3 times Shankaracharya's life. Now, how could they do so much? One important mystery is they did not waste their energy. No waste of intellectual energy, no waste of physical energy. I mean, mind was completely focused on this. Yoga will tell you that if a yogi can concentrate, if yogi concentrates on something, he captures it immediately in its most comprehensive form. Because, the simple example, when you read a book, normally when we read a book, we are touching the book in our hands, we hold the books in our hands, and we read those letters, eyes and mind are concentrated on the letters, and also we may be perhaps hearing, we may not be listening, but we be hearing a sound coming from the street, a car moving in the street. So our ears, our sense of touch and sense of sight, and some people may be chewing chewing gum while reading books. So sense of taste. And if we have some perfume in the room, you may be smelling. So sense of smell, sense of sight, sense of touch, sense of taste, sense of hearing. All these 5 senses and mind together are functioning. If a yogi is reading a book, he will be connecting with the essence of what the letters imply. He may be looking at the letter, but when he looks at the letter, he may be capturing it because his whole mind is completely focused on the letter. So he completely absorbs the meaning. His energy and focus of attention is not diverted to different channels of hearing, seeing, touching, smelling or tasting. Complete freedom, total freedom from waste of energy and time. This is one important aspect of yogi. And again, this is one aspect, most practical aspect. Another important aspect is all the obstacles that stand in our way of doing what we want to do, called antarayas. It's already discussed in the Yoga Sutras, 9 antarayas, vyadhisthana, alabdhabhumigatva, alasya, and so on. Laziness, internal and external obstacles, a kind of skepticism, doubt, samsaya is also one of the obstacles. All these obstacles are gone. All conflicts gone. All tensions and stress completely gone. We can live our life as if we are playing. When we play for a hobby, we don't feel tired. So life itself becomes one single, simple sport. So that state is called Jivan Mukti state, and that's what Vyasa's commentary is going to focus very soon. So Vyasa says, Tallabhad avidya deha kleshaha samula kasham kashida bhavanti. So when you reach this Dharmamekha Samadhi, what happens is all kleshas are completely gone. We already discussed in the previous session. What are kleshas? Avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha, klesha. I mean, avidya is ignorance, our wrong notion that we are this body-mind complex, and our identity with this body-mind complex. And then as a result of this, our extreme likes and dislikes, extreme aversion, extreme infatuation, and our sense of fear. All these are called kleshas. And the root cause of all these kleshas is avidya. Means our wrong knowledge, our wrong idea that we are this body-mind complex, our wrong notion that we are this body-mind complex. So that's why Vyasa says, Tallabhat, by this dharma mekha samadhi, by this state of concentration, what happens? Avidya deha kleshaha samulakasham. Mula means root or cause. The cause of all avidya, all kleshas, all conflicts is avidya. Avidya is the absence of knowledge about true nature, and also the wrong notion that we develop as a result of our wrong notion as to what we are. We believe that we are body-mind complex. Then we start identifying ourselves with many things, and then we start liking certain things, raga, we start hating certain things, dvesha, and then we become afraid of many things, that is called abhinivesha or bhaya. These are the kleshas. So, Vyasa says, when you attain this dharma mekha samadhi, avidyadeha kleshaha samulakasham kashida bhavanti. All these obstacles, all these kleshas get completely destroyed with root, not just cutting the branch of the tree or the trunk of the tree. You uproot that roots also, you remove the roots also. And then kushala akulascha, kushala akushalascha karmaseyaha samulaghadam hada bhavanti. These are very important terms, Sanskrit terms, but they are very profound. In a few words in Sanskrit, the Bhashyakara means the author of Bhashya Vyasa, he puts a lot of meaning into it. What he says is kushala akusalascha karmasyaha. What is karmasya? Karmasya is a repository. It is, in a way, it is a baggage of actions and their results, and the tendencies and impressions that we develop as a result of our actions, their results, and our various experiences. Every action produces a result, a residual effect. It's called vritti in the vocabulary of yoga and Vedanta. Let us say when we do something, there is a visible result, but the action that we do, that we are engaging in, or an experience that we have, will produce an invisible residual effect on our mental system. It remains there, it doesn't disappear. When we have an unpleasant experience, it will produce a negative impact, a residual effect on our mental system, and it becomes a tendency. So it's a vritti. Vritti becomes a samskara, a tendency. Samskara can become an attitude. Attitude can constitute our character, and this again influences our future actions and tendencies and attitudes. So some of these tendencies remain at a deeper layer of the mental system, and that mental system is called karma asya. Karmanam asya means a repository. Sometimes in our life, suddenly we find, as we think, when we meditate, some thought currents, tendencies emerge in our mental system. We don't know where they are coming from. Normally, if you use the tools of modern psychiatry or psychology, we can analyze and trace our tendencies to some experiences that we have experienced in the past, in this life. But there are tendencies and impressions which emerge from where we have no idea. So yoga system, yoga psychology tells you, Patanjali tells you, these samskaras or tendencies are coming from previous life cycles. These tendencies are deposited at the deeper layers of the mental system. That deeper layer is called karmasya. So, Vyasa says, Kushala akusalascha karmasyaha samulaghadam kada bhavanti. So, all these deeper layers of samskaras are completely neutralized. They get destroyed. Many of the samskaras belonging to the karmasya category, they fructify, they bear fruits, not in this life, in next life. I mentioned this earlier. Many of our tendencies we can trace back to our experiences in this life. But there are certain tendencies, very deep rooted. Suddenly we never knew that we have this skill or tendency or attitude in our mental system. They suddenly emerge. When you go to a place, when you read a book, when you go to, let's say for the first time, somebody going to a place of worship or participate in a prayer and meditation, suddenly you feel a kind of remote, intense inner connection with that prayer experience, which perhaps you are experiencing for the first time. So the inner connection comes from previous life. That is from karmasya, samskaras, called samskaras coming from karmasyas. Many of them cannot be known when we analyze our mind using the tools of modern psychology. But they suddenly express themselves in a very forceful manner. So Vyasa says, all these samskaras are completely destroyed. Samula ghada means they are destroyed along with their roots. This idea. Then klesha karma nivritto jivanneva vidwan vimukto bhavati. When this happens, you become what is called in Vedanta and Yoga jivan mukta. So jivanneva vidwan vimukto bhavati means you are living in this world. You may be an IT professional, you may be a lawyer, you may be a doctor, you may be an engineer. You may continue with your normal profession, but you are liberated from all conflicts. So Jivan Mukta is a particular state. Jivan Napi Mukta in Vedanta. Jivan Neva Vidwan Vimukto Bhavati. In fact, that's why great mystics like Swami Vivekananda always linked yoga with Vedanta. That's an important thing to remember. So when you reach that state, you don't develop anything special externally, but in your internal life, you feel this inner freedom. I gave this example on many occasions in the Mahabharata, maybe the most classical example, the most memorable example in the Mahabharata is the story of Jivan Mukta. He was actually a butcher. So it so happened that a great teacher was directed to him, and he went to his place. So he was directed to a marketplace, and he went to the marketplace, and he thought maybe this Jivan Mukta, this liberated soul, may be sitting under a tree. But he found him working in a butcher shop selling meat. So it's called Vyatha Gita. His name was Vyatha. In the Mahabharata, famous story. The story is quite elaborate. A monk was meditating under a tree, sitting under a tree. And suddenly he found his meditation was disturbed. He found two birds fighting, sitting on a branch of a tree above. So his meditation was disturbed by the sound. He got angry. He should not get angry, but he got angry. He looked at the birds. The story goes like that, and the birds were turned to ashes. And he became very proud of his supernatural powers. This is how the story goes. And then he got up. He went about begging for his food. He was a mendicant, like Buddhist monks, Of course, he was a Vedantic Hindu monk in the Mahabharata. He went from place to place begging his food. And once he reached a home and there was nobody visible, he shouted 3 times, Bhavadi Bhiksham Dehi, that's old style. Buddhist monks used to they used to mention Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, like that. So they used to do that. But this Vedantic monks used to say Bhavadi Bhiksham Dehi, he shouted. And then nobody came opening the door. Then he got slightly disturbed, and after some time one old lady came out, and this monk became he was trying to be a monk. I mean, he had just the initial stage of his spiritual evolution. That's why he got angry with the bird, So that's why he felt disturbed when he had to wait outside the door. And the lady came out. So when she found out that the monk was getting angry, she said, "There is no bird here for you to turn to ashes." So the monk was surprised because this lady has understood what happened to him a little earlier. And then he became very humble. He was a great spiritual seeker. So he could actually find out his own problems, his own faults. So he suddenly felt repentant. And then he asked her, "Who is your guru?" She told him, "My guru is sitting there." She gave direction, and eventually he reached a marketplace where a butcher was sitting there. He was selling meat, and then the butcher asked him, "What have you come from?" "Oh, that lady in the particular house directed you here." The monk said yes. And then afterwards, he asked him to wait for some time. There's a long discussion of Vedanta, higher philosophy, between this butcher, his name is Vyadha, and this monk. It is called Vyadha Gita in the Mahabharata. So the story goes, in the later part of Mahabharata, the story continues. This Vyadha, he was a spiritual seeker. When he was young, he went to a forest, he meditated, he went through different stages of evolution in spiritual life. Finally, he became a Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul. And then you know what happened? He came back and he continued the only job he knew, that was the job of a butcher. So, here Vyasa says, Jivaneva Vidwan Vimukto Bhavadi. So, a Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul, may not change his profession or job, but his life, his thoughts, his samskaras, his mind, all will undergo a complete transformation. He will continue his traditional job or tendencies. If he is a professional IT man, he will continue to be an IT professional. Because prarabdha karmas will remain. Prarabdha karmas means karmas which are responsible for his present life. That will continue. And for him, it doesn't make any difference whatever work he is doing. After reaching this spiritual liberation, he won't care as to what work he is doing. Because in his mind, he will be always in total identification with Atman. He may be externally, working, doing different jobs. He may also take responsibilities and duties. Apparently, he may be engaging in work that we may normally call secular work, not always meditating. But at the same time, internally, he will be always a Jivan Mukta. So, in our Hindu tradition, you find there are many stories. They were kings in ancient Vedic times. They were philosophers, sages and saints who were liberated souls. At the same time, they were ruling monarchs. They were ideal kings outwardly, but they were deeply contemplative. They were liberated souls in their inner life. So, sagely within, kingly without. When you combine the contemplative nature of a sage or a saint and the active dynamism of a king, what you do outwardly, it doesn't matter. He will feel himself to be an actor. He won't worry about anything. He will do everything that is necessary, but he won't worry. Then what happens, such persons do not waste their energy, mental energy or time. So that's why Jivaneva Vidwan Vimukto Bhavadi Kasmat Yasmat Vipiryayo Bhavasya Karanam. What happens, Viparya. Viparya is an important term in yoga philosophy. We already discussed this earlier, In this Samadhi Pada, if you can remember, 6th Sutra. Samadhi Pada, 6th Sutra is Pramana Viparya Vikalpa Nidra Smriteha. What are the 5 vrittis? True knowledge, wrong knowledge, that means wrong notion, conceptual knowledge, sleep and memory. These are 5 dimensions of mental vrittis, of which Viparya is a false knowledge of something which does not correspond to its real form. False knowledge of something which doesn't correspond to real form. To give you an example, suppose you're walking on the seashore. You can see the mother of pearl, very brilliant. It looks like silver. It's exactly like silver, apparently, when you look at it. When the evening sunlight reflects on this mother of pearl, it actually resembles a real silver. But it is not silver. It is only mother of pearl. It's actually the outer shell of some insects or some creatures. Now, outwardly, you may think it is silver, but it is not silver. What you see outside doesn't, and then you may give it a name. It is silver, but it is not silver. That's the idea behind. It's an example of false knowledge. Pramanena badhyade viparyeha means when you actually bring out this mother of pearl to your home, you break it, you understand it is a worthless outer shell of some creature. But when it is lying on the seashore, on the sand, when the sunlight was reflecting on it, you mistook it to be a piece of silver. So that's an example of viparya. So Vyasa says all these wrong notions completely disappear. Normally in our life we think many things which are really insignificant. We consider them to be very significant. And what is really significant, we consider to be insignificant. This is a normal human experience. Everyone knows that if you fall sick, next day you may recover. But when you actually fall sick, you get terribly disturbed, depressed, because you wrongly associate this sickness to be something permanent. So we get attached to money. We know money is not eternal, but for the time being, we consider money to be something as a permanent source of joy and happiness, which it is not. So these are all wrong. These are all examples of wrong knowledge. So what happens when you attain this dharmamekha samadhi is yasmat vipiryo bhavasya karanam. This wrong notion, the wrong notion that we are this physical body and not the Atman, we are this body mind complexes, we are not the Atman. This is the wrong concept, wrong idea. This wrong idea is the cause of these continuing cycles of birth, life, death and rebirth. This continuing wheel, this karma, vritti, samskara, chakram, this wheel. Of course, in the Buddhist tradition also, this praditya samutpada. Due to trishna or desire, we go through this wheel of birth, life, death and rebirth. So Vyasa says, Yasmat Vibhirriyo Bhavasya Karanam. So Vibhirriya is the cause. The wrong notion is the cause of Bhava means rebirth, continuing cycles of birth, life, death and rebirth. The Vibhirriya is the cause of this wheel. And you get out of this cycle of birth, life, death and rebirth. Nahi kshina vibhirriya kaschit kenajit kujit jato drishyate iti. So the Bhashya, the Vyasa's commentary concludes that a person who is totally free from this viparriya, he is never reborn and he is never subjected to these continuing cycles of birth, life, death and rebirth. Vibhirriya is the opposite of klesha karma nivritti. So Vibhirriya is used in this bhashya as the opposite of this dharma mekha samadhi or klesha karma nivritti, as we mentioned in this 30th sutra. After this we go to the next sutra, that is 31st sutra. Again, there is a difference in the chronology of the sutras depending upon one part of the Vyasa's commentary, which is sometimes taken as a separate sutra, but we don't bother about it. Tada sarva avarana mala apedasya jnanasya anandyat jneyam alpam. It's also very famous commentary by Vyasa. So Vyasa writes, the meaning of the sutra is very simple. When you attain this Dharmamekha Samadhi, its results and benefits are outlined in so many continuing series of sutras. When you attain this, what happens? Because of the infinity, because you get infinite knowledge, you get infinite transcendental knowledge, you become totally free from all impurities that cover you, this wheel of impurities. And then what happens, whatever else is left out to be known appear to be rather insignificant. In fact, this is one of the distinct qualities of a spiritual seeker. When you actually take to spirituality, or even when you take to some higher pursuit of knowledge, something happens to you. You don't worry too much about other things. You consider other things to be of relative value when you consider spirituality or even philosophy or higher music as of absolute value. This is an important thing. Without considering other things as insignificant, you cannot really focus on something that is really valuable. This is an important thing to remember. No one can, you cannot worship God and mammon simultaneously. If you cannot do that. In Shankaracharya's commentary says, it is artha kukkudi nyaya, means a kind of analogy. A very funny, humorous example is given. The Mimamsakas ask one question, these ritualists. We want to perform rituals and we want to go to heaven. We want to enjoy all these wonderful things. Along with that, we also want to become mystics. So it's not possible. If you want to be Buddha and also you want to be a big businessman in, let us say, in a big investor in a stock exchange, you can't be both. I want to be a Buddha and I also want to do very well in money stock exchange. You can't do that both. So Shankaracharya says, suppose you have a hen and it can lay eggs. So suppose somebody says, I want to cut it into half. The one half I want to keep in the refrigerator so that it can lay eggs tomorrow. The other half I want to eat now. You can't do that. Ardha Kukkudi Nyaya. Ardha means half. Hen you cut into two. One half you keep in the refrigerator, expecting that it will lay eggs. Tomorrow you can have omelette. The other half of the hen you eat now. You cannot do that. So that's the implication of this sutra. It says, Tada sarva avarana mala apedasya jnanasya anandya jneyam alpam. When you reach that state, what happens? When you focus on this higher spiritual pursuit, you develop a tendency to consider everything else as alpam, relatively insignificant. So that's the meaning of this sutra. Now the bhashya comes. Bhashya, sarvaihi klesha karma avaranaihi vimuktasya jnanasya anandyam bhavati. So what happens, when a person gets total freedom from this cover, the outer veil of afflictions and worries and tendencies and negative samskaras, then what happens, that person gets his infinite knowledge. It is not knowledge in the sense of information. It is the deeper mystical experience. In that sense, the word jnanam is used here. Jnanam is translated into the English word knowledge in the translations. It is not intellectual concept. It is not intellectual knowledge or information. It's actually an evolution in our inner life or inner higher experience. When you reach that experience will tell you this higher pursuit is infinite in its scope. This knowledge, this experience is the essence of infinite knowledge, awareness. And then what happens? Along with that, what happens? You consider everything else as of relative value or insignificant value. Avagarena tamasa abhibhudam avruta jnana sattum Kojideva rajasa pravartidam udghadidam grihana samatham bhavadi. The idea is, when you don't get this perfect spiritual experience, what happens, then the Rajoguna that is already working within our mental system, that prompts you to look around the world and capture everything or consider everything, all the secular, immaterial, insignificant things as very, very important. If we don't have this perfect knowledge, then we will think money is important, is the most important thing. Position or status is most important. Name and fame are most important. Why? Because avarakena tamasa abhibhudam avruta jnana sattam. When our mind is covered, veiled, is covered by tamoguna, by ignorance, what happens is the inner rajoguna will prompt us to do many things, to look upon all these immaterial, insignificant worldly things as of great value. But the moment we get this viveka khyadi or the dharma meka samadhi, then all other things, whatever else we find in this money, wealth, status, whatever, they're all of not so very important. You don't run away from duties and responsibilities. You don't dismiss your duties and responsibilities as unnecessary. You will do your best. So, along with that, you also retain in your mind, these things will come and go. They are not eternal. As I mentioned, the philosopher king ideal which I mentioned earlier. Sagely within, kingly without. Outward, for all outward appearances, you'll be very active. For all outward appearances, you'll be working hard, you'll be achieving great things, but in your own inner being, you're aware these things are of not much value. As this awareness of the insignificance of material things, of worldly things, that is one important component of this higher awareness. Tatra yada sarvaihi avranamalayhi apagadamalam bhavati tada bhavati asya anandyam jnanasya anandyat jneyam alpam sampadhyati. When you reach this state, there are some examples given here later. When you are completely free from, this wheel of ignorance, this wheel of this cover of, we call avanam mala. Mala means wrong tendencies, impressions, and attitudes, which actually constitute a veil that cover our true identity. When you get rid of this covering veil or this covering curtain of mental impurities, when you become totally free from them, then what happens? You attain infinite awareness, infinite spiritual knowledge. Jnanasya anandyam. And then what happens? Then anandya jneyam alpam sampadhyate. Then whatever else is left out, it's all alpam, it becomes relatively insignificant. So a person who is focused on spiritual matters, he develops a different attitude towards the world. He doesn't run away from the world. According to Vedanta, he is like a king who plays violin in his court. In the Vedantic commentary, Shankaracharya gives Rajnyaha Veena Vadanavad. The example is given. Suppose a king plays violin in his own court, in the presence of his ministers and courtiers. He doesn't have to satisfy anyone. He is totally relaxed. But suppose the same king, he invites or he asks a professional violinist to come and play in the court. The professional visiting violinist will be always anxious to give a good performance, because if he gives a very good performance, he will get a lot of rewards. So he will be very anxious. He is not relaxed. He is always disturbed internally. But a king, on the other hand, is totally relaxed. Even if he performs very poorly, his courtiers and ministers will applaud him. He can be totally free from any anxiety. Like that, a spiritually oriented person, a person who has a spiritual ideal in front of him, he can always live in this world with total relaxation, with absolute joy and bliss, without any worry, without any complaint, without any internal disturbance. That feeling of a deeply felt internal relaxation, that is one important characteristic of a spiritual person. That's why in the Bhagavad Gita and other places, Lord Krishna gives a list of important characteristics of a devotee of God. Sandushta satatam yogi yatatma dridhanisyeha. In the 12th chapter, Bhakti Yoga, it's a chapter dedicated to the path of devotion. So Lord Krishna says, he is giving a list of the fundamental characteristics of a devotee of God, or in a general sense, a spiritual seeker. So a spiritual seeker will be always in a state of total relaxation, joy, happiness, and contentment, santushta, because he has directed all his thoughts and ideas and worries in one direction. It doesn't mean that he is indifferent to his worldly duties and responsibilities. He may be performing his duties and responsibility very well, but he is not very much worried. if he doesn't do very well. But actually he will be able to do very well because he has focused his mind on one higher ideal. So his mind actually becomes a very effective tool for concentration. With that mind, even if he engages in secular duties and responsibilities, he will be able to do very well, whatever may be his duties and responsibilities. So that's why Vyasa says, Tatra yada sarvaihi avranamalayhi apagadamalam bhavati. That person's mind becomes totally free from all these impurities that cover the mental system. And then what happens, he attains this infinite spiritual awareness, and then he considers all these worldly things as of no significance. Again, a spiritual seeker doesn't become indifferent or insensitive or inefficient or lazy, not at all. But he can live in this world, he can be a successful businessman, he can be a successful administrator, he can become a successful musician, but at the same time, he will have his mind focused on something higher, transcendental. So that actually enables him to do his even secular duties very efficiently and very properly. That's the advantage. Why? Because his energy resources are not wasted. His mind is fully focused. His mind is not distracted, dissipated in different directions. Then there is an interesting comparison given. So, yatha akashe khadyodha. So, akasha means sky, khadyodha means fireflies. So, suppose there are thousands of stars, maybe also brilliant moonlight in midnight. And there may be some fireflies also you can see in the air. They are insignificant compared to the vast sky and the thousands of stars which light up the sky. So these fireflies are relatively insignificant. So when you actually connect with this higher spiritual awareness, then everything else becomes like the insignificant firefly. That's the idea behind it. Then yatra idamuktam antho manim avidyad tam anangulihi avayad agrivalatam pratyamunchat tam ajihya abhibhujayad. Anyway, so it actually says that such a Jivan Mukta or liberated soul, it is impossible for him to undergo this cyclic rotation of being born, birth, then leaving this misery, suffering and enjoying, happiness and unhappiness, then dying and again being reborn, again continuing this miserable existence, suffering and enjoying both, good and bad, happiness and unhappiness, which constitute different experiences in human life, then dying, again being reborn, discontinuing cycles of birth, life and rebirth. It becomes impossible for such a liberated soul. It's almost like Buddha's, this the highest experience Buddha. So, when you practice the Ashtanga Yoga, you reach the spiritual liberation, then you get freed from the cycles of life, death and rebirth. That's what Buddha also says. That's the idea behind it. And then there's an example given. Antaha manim avidyat. Just like, a blind man. A blind man cannot take a needle and pierce through so many gems and diamonds to make a garland. A blind man cannot do that. Just like a blind man who cannot pierce a series of gems and diamonds with a needle, such a liberated man cannot be reborn again. He cannot undergo this cyclic rotation of transmigratory cycle of birth, life and rebirth. Again, another example, it says, tam anangulihi avayat. Ananguli means a person who has no fingers. He cannot stitch a garland. A person who has no fingers cannot stitch a garland. Like that, a Jivan Mukta, liberated soul, cannot go through these continuing cycles of life. Again, another example is given. Agrivaka tam pratyamunchat. Agriva means somebody who has no neck. If you don't have a neck, you cannot wear a garland. Like that, just as a blind man cannot pierce gems of diamonds or pearls with a needle, just like a fingerless man cannot stitch a garland, or just a person who has no neck cannot wear a garland, a Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul, cannot again undergo these cycles of life, death and rebirth. He will be totally free from these worries, this transmigratory cycle, which is the ultimate purpose of yoga and Vedanta. Yoga and Vedanta both are the same. That's the idea behind. So, this is the, of course, now the next sutra is Tadakridarthanam Gunanam Parinama Kramasamaptihi Gunanam. Of course, this we'll discuss later, next class. Okay. Now you can ask questions. You are most welcome to ask with questions. Yeah.
Should I ask? I can ask my questions?
Most welcome, please.
Okay. I want to know how it seems like there are two methods when one is working. One is the Jnana Marga method, and one's the Bhakti Marga. And I'm wondering how one practices either or both. Maybe I'll just ask one. Like if one is doing Bhakti Marga, how does one pay more than lip service to offering one's work, as worship? I can say, "Oh, I offer this to you, Holy Mother," and then I go on and, it's not, how do you make it intense and real and authentic?
Yeah. First of all, one point I want to mention, these parts they come together. In real life, all great devotees were also practically karma yogins. It's an important thing. When you practice bhakti marga, when you become a devotee of God, naturally whatever you do, you mentally offer to the Lord. It's actually karma yoga only. So, and when you practice karma yoga, you don't claim anything for yourself. You may not openly practice, let us say, theism or meditating on a personal God or anything, but actually in effect you are practicing the same path which will take you to the same goal as bhakti yoga. But a bhakti yogi is always a karma yogi. A karma yogi may not be formally a bhakti yogi, because Buddha was a karma yogi all his life. You cannot see him as a devotee. That is true, that's a fact. So, but devotee was always a karma yogi. You don't find a single devotee anywhere in any tradition who didn't offer mentally whatever he did mentally, who did not offer to God. So, offering the results of one's actions becomes automatically to any practitioner of bhakti yoga, and that helps him to get rid of all the vrittis, vasanas. He actually attained the same state which is called Dharmamekha Samadhi in this Patanjali system. That's an important thing to remember. So, if you look at the inner life of any of these great spiritual practitioners, they all reach this state which we which is called in Patanjali system by the distinct technical name Dharmameka Samadhi or Viveka Khyadi or Karma Nivritti. It's called the same with different names, but in practice, this is the one stage that every spiritual practitioner, whether a man like Buddha who did not accept God, or a Shankaracharya who was, of course, the exponent of Jnana Marga, or any devotee in any tradition, even in non-Hindu tradition, devotee like Saint Teresa of Avila, read her autobiographical writings. She's always, when she did something with a prayer or even organizing the convent for which she had to face a lot of difficulties. We read the life and biography of Saint Teresa of Avila. She reformed the church, the convent, the denomination to which she belonged. She had to face a lot of challenges and problems. But all the time she had this orientation towards Jesus Christ in whatever way. It was Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga really combined. One exception that you find is Buddha. That perhaps, Buddha was, according to great teachers of modern times like Vivekananda, who was not just an academic philosopher, but he was a spiritual teacher who had experienced the essence of what he taught. Buddha was both a Jnana Yogi, Jnana Marga, and also a Karma Yogi. But Buddha's teaching was essentially, Swamiji said Buddha was teaching a more humanistic interpretation of Upanishadic philosophy, which is Jnana, part of Jnana. So in real life, we could say, when you become a Karma Yogi in modern times, you actually end up being a Bhakta. So far as the impact of the mental system is concerned, it is the same as the effect of a Karma Yogi. So there is no difference. A Raja Yoga, the Patanjali system is called Raja Yoga in some ways. But actually in Raja Yoga we reach this state of Samadhi, Dharmameka Samadhi. That is precisely the state which every spiritual teacher, every spiritual practitioner reaches one way or other. It is explained in one technical language in this system. But the state of absolute freedom from any kind of inner worries, tensions, botherations, fully establishing yamas and niyamas, non-violence, total freedom from greed, total freedom from anything, any kind of desire, and then inner contentment and purity. All these values, yamas and niyamas, which become the natural characteristics of every spiritual teacher, spiritual seeker. It comes automatically. As I mentioned earlier, Dharmameka Samadhi at one end, yamas and niyamas on the other hand. They are interrelated. Without yamas and niyamas, no one can reach here. Just like fuel. If you have got enough fuel, then only you can fly or you can drive. So, when you reach this state, it is a state where everyone has to reach and everyone will reach whatever may be the tradition you are following. That's the idea. So all paths are interrelated. When you are a Karma Yogi, you need not be a Bhakti Yoga, a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga in the formal sense. But the same mental purity that a practitioner of Bhakti Yoga attains, you attain through Karma Yoga. So.
Can I ask my question, Swami? This is Suvendu.
Yeah.
Yes, you were next. Please go ahead.
Pranam, Swamiji.
Yeah.
This is a question I wanted to ask you for a long time, but I was a little afraid. So my question is, why do we talk about freeing ourselves from the cycle of birth, death, rebirth?
Yeah.
Why don't we aspire to engage in good karma and get a rebirth as a higher and more evolved soul and enjoy the cycle of death, birth and rebirth? So why there is so much negativity to free from this cycle? Where do we go after that?
Yeah, that's true. It is an approach, uh, as we evolve further, as we evolve in spiritual life, many people reach a point where, what's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of death? What's the meaning of actions? What's the ultimate essence of this creation? These questions may not occur to everyone. And it is not a negative approach to begin with. It's not a negative approach. Of course, there is one school in bhakti tradition where a bhakta wants to enjoy bhakti, being a bhakta, being a devotee all the time. That is also a higher stage, no doubt about it. But in Vedanta and Yoga, even the most advanced, most enjoyable sattvic state, even the most enjoyable worldly experience is considered to be essentially imperfect because it is impermanent. So this is an important thing. Why should anything that is impermanent be imperfect? That's a big question. Only Vedanta and Yoga and higher philosophy teach us that anything which is impermanent is by its very nature imperfect. That's what Buddha also taught actually. Everything is kshanika. So we should go beyond what is momentariness, So, in one, there is a tradition, mostly in the Vaishnava tradition, there is a view that there is nothing wrong in going through these continuing cycles of life, death and rebirth. Well, you can acquire good karmas, vasanas, but how long? That question. This question is not always raised in all traditions, but in many traditions this is raised. Yoga is one of those philosophical systems where this question is raised. That's why we are discussing here. Suppose you read Bhagavata Purana, for example. In Bhagavata Purana, if you read the story of Prahlada and other bhaktas, you can find as many lives as possible, taking the holy name of God and enjoying the life of a devotee and being always in the state of bliss. That is also a great experience. That is what Vaishnava Bhakti school. That is also valuable. It depends upon your temperament. If a devotee, if a person is of the temperament that he wants to be born again and again and live a holy life, perfectly okay. But I don't think there is anybody who will enjoy living a life in which you are miserable for some time and then happy later and again coming back to misery. I don't think anybody will be very happy or excited about it. This is an important thing. So I don't want this transition from misery to happiness, again back to misery. If you can always experience this inner bliss of a devotee, that is certainly great. That view is found in the Bhagavata Purana. That's no doubt about it. That's another school of thought. That's perfectly a great ideal, no doubt. Okay? But yoga takes a different view. Yoga wants you to reverse your evolution. It's called reverse evolution, Pratiprasava, that we are going to discuss in the coming sutras, maybe next week or next week. It's an important theme in yoga system. You have come all the way descending to the level of the 5 elements. Now you want to go back to the Mahatattva and then Prakriti, and then you want to dissociate yourself with Prakriti and become your Purusha. You want to reconnect with your Purusha identity. That's a yoga approach. Vedanta, you want to get out of the cyclic rotation and attain your Atman identity. But in the Bhagavata devotional tradition, you always want to live the life of a devotee. It's perfectly okay. If you become a Mahabhava like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, nothing wrong in living 1,000,000 years. You're always blissful. But then such a devotee will not cry when the money is lost in the bank, when the banks collapse, stock markets collapse, when you lose your job, you lose your health. Such a devotee will not cry. He will be able to be in a state of bliss. Even the doctor tells you have blood cancer. You will be still happy. Can we be that? This is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. that state is not inferior to the state of Jivan Mukta. So, you are perfectly, I fully agree with you. If a devotee wants to always enjoy the blissful experience of being a devotee, that is a great state. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a great example. He was always in a state of communion with the Lord. But he never worried. If somebody had reported him you have blood cancer, he will absolutely no problem. Have you reached that state? Then we need not worry about coming out of this wheel of transmigratory cycle. That's the idea behind.
Very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Namaste Maharaj.
Namaste.
My question kind of continues along that
Yeah.
line. So these last few sutras have been very much, I look at as because it's in Kaivalya Pada, it's more at the pinnacle of a spiritual journey, the step before.
Yeah.
Many of us are still in a long way to reach there. And I was kind of alluding or thinking that, okay, there might be a sense that some of us might think about, don't want to accumulate more kleshas. All of this can lead to inaction. So you mentioned about Shankaracharya, Swami Vivekananda, others, they were all men of action. So you guided me offline last week that you can do things, but don't be passionate about this. Whether it is the compassion also should not be too passionate.
Yeah.
At the same time, there should not be any room for hatred also. Thank you for that guidance offline. But my question is, can you guide us on a little bit elaborate on guiding us like away from inaction? I think that's, for example, there is so much cruelty and misery going on. We are attending here, our life has gotten better because of all these lectures, now more than a year. Now, we can be ambassadors of improving the world in a slightly better way, right? But without detachment, we cannot. Inaction is not, I think inaction, I question myself, inaction is not the right thing at this stage. You can't be attached, but you can take action, bring other people to these lectures, or find your own purpose to see how I can do an act. So my question is more about inaction is wrong. So can you guide us a little bit?
Now, inaction is impossible. Whether right or wrong, it is impossible. Lord Krishna makes a statement in the Gita, Nahi kasikshanamabi jadu tishtadi akarma krita karidehi avashak karma sarvapagudijai gunaihi. Suppose a person decides to become inactive. He has to eat his food, he has to breathe, he has to maintain his health, he has to walk, he has to clean his room, and he has to do a job, he has to do his duty. So, physical inaction is not only impossible, but as Lord Krishna goes even further, he says, a person who claims to be free from physical action is a hypocrite. So, he says, Karmendriyani samyamya yaste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudhatma mithyacharaha sauchida. He is a fool. He is a deluded man who thinks that he can remain away, he can withdraw himself away from all his duties and responsibilities and actions. It is physically impossible. And not only that, even if you try to be physically inactive and sitting in an easy chair doing nothing, your mind will be hyperactive actually. So where is inaction? One way or other we are always active. So the first step in spiritual life is to give one positive orientation, some good orientation to whatever you normally do. Along with our normal duties and responsibilities and job and professions and all that, let us also do something really worthwhile. That's the first step in spiritual life. Actually, for any person to evolve, the first step in spiritual life is some kind of good action. That's why Buddha in his Ashtanga Yoga, he mentions Samyak Ajiva, the right livelihood, Samyak Vyayama, and Samyak, and also Samyak Karma. So, you find some kind of good actions, some kind of righteous actions we should do. In a way, at the beginning of our spiritual life, we should have some higher ideal to look up to. You may not have succeeded in practicing it completely, something higher to look forward. That will give us an anchor. It will be a source of relief from worries and anxieties. Everyone will work as a job, duties and responsibilities that will go on. But along with that, something higher to look for. And as we continue doing this, at some point, our mind also will evolve. One important thing that is very striking in Patanjali Yoga Sutra, one of the distinct contributions of Patanjali, of course Vyasa who wrote the commentaries, when you keep doing something worthwhile, you cannot help being a good man. When you keep doing something good, noble, you cannot help being a good, noble person. Maybe in this life or next life. And at the physical level, everyone can start doing something worthwhile. Either good of others or good for ourselves. Along with reading so many books, read some good books. Along with doing many things, do something noble. So that's why, Patanjali Yoga Sutra, the alphabet, the kindergarten in yoga practitioner is Kriya Yoga. Tapaswadhyaya Ishara Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. I mean, whatever we do, give it some positive orientation. That is the first sutra in the sadhana pada. So, that is the very kindergarten of spiritual practice in yoga. The Kriya Yoga should not be mixed with something else that is now known, but Kriya Yoga, according to Patanjali, is much more profound. In fact, Vajaspati and Vijnana Bhikshu and others have included Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga in the Kriya Yoga category, while interpreting the first sutra of sadhana pada. Tapa, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhananani Kriya Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is there, Karma Yoga is also there. Yeah.
Yogi, you're next.
Pranam Maharaj.
Yeah, namaskar.
This birth, death, rebirth cycle, this one Islamic scholar said there is no mention of it in the Vedas, and he challenged this is a concoction of all the Hindu philosophers. There is no reference.
That is absolute gibberish. That is absolute rubbish. Because Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, all these are clearly explained in so many of Vedic literature. Upanishads, the Puranas, and also the Gita. So, if when you want to read books, you should always go to the proper authorities. So, what I would say, Karma Yoga is a very important theme in the most important religious, philosophical, spiritual work of Hindu tradition, the Bhakti Yoga. In fact, Gandhi, apparently the greatest practitioner of Gita in 20th century, Karma Yoga is Gandhi. And you know what Gandhi did? Gandhi, I mentioned this very time, Gandhiji was not sitting in a forest. Gandhiji was not staying in an ashrama, in a monastery. Gandhi was right in the midst of everyday activities. Not only Gandhi, even the other day a great Gandhian passed away in India. His name was maybe a Jyoti Lula can... Subbarao. Swami Vedanta is sitting here. Subbarao. We actually when he passed away, we had a commemorative program, This man, he was more than 95 years old. 92. And he is the latest that I can recall. I have, of course, seen quite a few. Now remember, Karma Yoga in modern times, after Vivekananda, after Swami Vivekananda, the one Indian leader, great Indian who popularized Karma Yoga was Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi was not a monk, Gandhi was a politician. Being a politician, he was practicing, he was demonstrating the scientific spiritual value of Karma Yoga even when he was agitating against the British rulers. Remember. And then you never found him any time, he was never agitated, never worried, never repented. He was a classic example of stability of mind. And when the Lord Mountbatten visited Vardha Ashrama, he was the viceroy. Maybe he's not a very prominent man for an American, but for those times, he was the grandson of Queen Victoria, if you want. Very funny joke about it. This man went to see Gandhi. And Gandhi was inside his room, maybe he was meditating, he was perhaps fasting of all things. And this Lord Mountbatten sat outside, squatting on the floor. There was not a big chair arranged for him. And Gandhi came out slowly after some time and he communicated with him. He won't speak, he was observing fasting and he was observing silence. Mauna Vrata, they call in Sanskrit. And this man influenced not one person, continues to influence. I am quoting Gandhi's name for one reason. If you quote Gandhi's name, you will very well know that Gita is relevant not only to spiritual thinkers, Gita is relevant to everyone, any profession, including even professional politicians. So, Karma Yoga is one of the greatest themes discussed in all Hindu Vedanta scriptures. So, when you want to know about Gita, Hinduism, Karma Yoga, kindly read authentic authors and works written by learned people. I don't want to give my opinion about other sources. At least there are many great Western authors who have written extensive works on Gita. Great, who were born in Christian and Jewish traditions, wrote great things on Gita. So read them at least. If you can't read Sanskrit commentaries, at least read Gandhi's Anasakti Yoga, Mahadev Desai's composition. So if you want to know what Karma Yoga means according to Bhagavad Gita, read Gandhi's life and read his own book on Anasakti Yoga, on the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you.
Sorry, Maharaj, I did not frame the question well. The challenge was about Punarjanma or reincarnation.
Yeah.
That is not in the Vedas. Is that correct?
That is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. There are references in the Chandogya Upanishad, there are references in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there are references even in the non-Vedic literature like Mahabharata. Remember, even books like Mahabharata and Ramayana are based on Vedic teachings. They are not detached or different from Vedas. Mahabharata and all the Puranas are only expansions. They are elaborate expansions of Vedic literature. They are not detached or different from Vedas. That's the idea.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you.
I don't see
Swami,
any.
Yeah.
I have one question that you alluded to. You said that, I didn't know that I have a chance to ask this, but that a devotee, I guess something like Savikalpa Samadhi is as good as Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Is that what you were saying when you said leading that life was the life of a devotee?
Yeah. It's like I think a postgraduate master's degree is as good as PhD. Really. If you study little longer, for longer years, you get a PhD. That's all. But you don't, when you get a PhD, you don't reject what you learned when you were preparing for your master's. So that's all. Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the natural destination of the process that took you to Savikalpa Samadhi. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, thank you.
Maharaj, was Gandhiji a Rajarshi?
Yeah, Gandhi was a Rajarshi, yes. Because he had so many followings, And this man who was practically, he didn't have any political authority. He was not the president of Indian National Congress, mind you. In the early days he became the leader. Then he was a kind of moral, spiritual authority in that sense. But he was a Rajarshi. That's important. He was a classical example of Rajarshi. Yeah. Another example, Lincoln. Any politician, any administrator who is doing what we normally call secular work, administration, business, but with a higher vision that goes beyond the secular, beyond the empirical. That person is a Rajarshi. Rajanascha Rishayascha Rajasheka. That is Shankaracharya's definition. I mean, he is a king so far as action, enthusiasm, efficiency are concerned, but a sage in terms of his contemplative nature, his philosophical convictions, his transcendental outlook, he is a sage in that sense. Combination of both. Yeah.
Modi is trying hard to be that.
Who?
Modi is trying hard.
Yeah, of course. So
And when he came to America, he didn't. He was on a fashion.
we need not speak about the present figures. We normally refer to. Yeah, certainly I agree with you. I'm in full agreement with your opinion, but we don't normally discuss or mention the present. But I'm in full agreement with what you said, no doubt about it. Okay, but we don't want to discuss this contemporary political leaders. So thank you for the questions. In fact, these questions are very helpful for me to clarify certain points. And, okay, thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Namaskar, namaskar.
Recording stopped.
Yeah, namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Yogi. Thank you.